Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Growing Good Humans podcast. My name is Lara Barr. I'm the owner and founder of Emerging Educational Consulting. We provide one-to-one mentorship for students from the beginning to end of the college application process. We also provide services in executive function coaching. When people ask me what I do and why, I tell them I wake up every day. Our whole team wakes up every day committed to growing good humans. And what better way to do that than providing information to impact and transform? And that's what we're here to do today. Today's title is called Accommodations in College, Everything You Want to Know. Please know that you are welcome to ask any questions in the chat, and we will hopefully be able to get those answered. If not, we can answer them later. Today, I'm so excited to introduce Julie Scaff. She has been working in disability services for over 30 years, most recently at St. Mary's College of California. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love for you to start just sharing with us a little bit of a bio and about you, and then let's just dive into the questions.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Julie Scaff. I've been in higher ed and disability for right around 30 years, mostly in the role of Director of Student Disability Service Offices. So I have a lot of expertise on the end of the college end in terms of working with students as they start college using accommodations, seeing them all the way through to graduation. One thing I've really enjoyed is starting to prepare families when they come see us over the summer and making sure everyone knows what to expect. So the student has a smooth process once they get to college using their accommodations. So happy to be here to talk about that today.
That's great. And that's exactly where we fit in. I mean, as you know, we work with young people. Many of our students are neurodiverse and have had accommodations in high school. And I think there's always this question of what are the differences between what happens in high school and what happens in college? And maybe we can just start with that simple question.
Mm-hmm. So there are some similarities. It's not going to be completely different and not something the student is going to be so out of the box with, but there are a couple main differences. So a few things families and students should know. At the high school level, students might have a 504, an IEP, and the accommodations are individualized. So students might have a very individual plan for them in terms of they take a shorter test, they don't have as many questions, there's really hands-on support. So one of the big differences is going to be that their 504 itself or IEP does not transfer to college, but what they will do is have an opportunity to apply for accommodations. The accommodations are under the ADA laws, so they're structured and there is support there. But all students are going to be required to meet the academic expectations of everyone else in the class. So they're going to go to class, they're going to have a syllabus. Every student in the class, including students with disabilities, will have to meet all of those expectations. So same number of assignments, same tests, same format. So that's one really important thing for families to know. There's a few other things I'm sure we'll dive into, but the role of the parent is really going to change between high school and college in terms of working with students on their accommodations, and then also the types of accommodations, which we'll get into as well. But not everything a student has as an accommodation in high school is going to transfer over to college. There are a lot of support systems, but there's going to be some things students might have liked having and found beneficial in high school that does not transfer to college.
Am I correct in saying that the 504s and the IEPs and the 504s are protected by the American Disability? No, oh my gosh, the IDA, yes. The IDA laws. And then when they go to college, it's protected by the American Disability Act. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And what I'd like to point out is it doesn't transfer, but I don't want people to think that that can't be used as a source of support. So a student in college, we don't consider them to have a 504 plan or an IEP. They will have accommodations, but it's important for families to know that that documentation or, the meetings they've had with their counselors in high school or their IEPs, that documentation can be used to support their request in college. But the verbiage is different. They don't have an IEP in college, but they will have accommodations as regulated under the ADA Act.
Okay, that's perfect. I just want to make sure I was using the right
Mhm.
language. I think, always one of the biggest questions for everybody is what documentation. Even I, in my announcement of this big event with you that has been much anticipated for, I know, our families, is this question of what do you need to bring with you? And the IEPs and 504s don't follow you. That documentation does not follow you. I think what we're learning is that many disability offices are becoming more flexible. Traditionally, it has been you needed to have solid documentation done by an educational psychologist. It needed to be updated within 3 years of the application. And it sounds like some of that is changing. I know we have someone in our Colorado community, Katie, who is just absolutely an advocate in this state for making sure that people can use those IEPs and schools for documentation. But it seems like it's really depends on the school and depends on the situation. So will you just speak to that and what's happening in that landscape and what your experience is?
Sure, sure. And it has been very interesting since I've been in this area for so long to actually see the changes as I've been working with students. And so you're right. At one time, in the early days, it was pretty specific about what the documentation was, what tests you had to have done. It had to be within 3 years. But what's really great is people out there advocating for students with disabilities have really helped move kind of best practices and acceptable policies to be more inclusive and more student focused. And so as of today, which again, they're always changing with this area, but as of today, sort of the best practice is that the documentation, we're not really looking at the year, like what date the evaluation was done or the date was done, but we are looking to make sure the documentation is reflective of the student's experience today. So if a student was tested, let's say freshman year of high school, so 4 years ago by the time they start college, it's outside the 3 years, but if it really is reflective of how the student views maybe what some of their challenges are, the recommendations from the evaluator about what's helpful, if those are still recent and accurate for how they feel today, then that probably is acceptable documentation. If a student was tested when they were 9, things have changed a lot by the time you get to high school and then college. So maybe that's not so reflective. My main goal with families, at least in the institutions I've been at, is I don't want families to go get retested without really needing to. So my recommendation is for these high school students who are getting ready to go to college is connect with the colleges you're interested in attending, find out what their documentation requirements are, because there is some difference. Some schools don't require documentation at all. Some require more. That's going to be a little more case by case on colleges. But ask them first what their requirements are before you go out and get more testing, because we don't want families. It's expensive to get retested if you're doing a full psychoed evaluation. So ask your college first. Show them what you have. That's what I tell families. Come and show me what you have. I can look at it, and then I'll let you know if I need a little more documentation to support the request that you're making, depending on what the accommodation is. So it's really going to depend on the school, and you could be asking those questions as you're deciding what college to go to. You could be talking to the Student Disability Services Office to ask them directly, what are your requirements? What are you looking for? And ask them if they'd be willing to look at the documentation you already have.
Okay, that's great. I think on our side, with all of that new information, we are remaining a little more conservative on people having their things updated, because it sounds easy to say, oh, just give them a call or call that person. But a lot of these students are drowning in senior year. They haven't made a decision, and it's hard to get in for testing. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 months to get into testing. So while we appreciate that there are things changing, it still seems up in the air enough that it feels like the wise decision is to have some updated documentation of some kind that shows what kind of accommodations a student is getting while they are in high school, that reflects what they will need in college. And back to what you're saying, is to have students really be able to articulate what it is that they need, because their parents won't be doing that for them anymore. So a lot of our work is getting students to really understand their neuropsych profiles, their identity around their neurodiversity, and to be advocating for it is what they need. Now, there are some exceptions to that, which are, sometimes there are colleges that are only for students who are neurodiverse. And there are colleges that have very specific, of course, we all know SALT in Arizona, like very specific supports and services. But many of our students are just going to colleges that say they have disability services, but we also all know in the field that can be a huge range of what students access. So I am building to a question, I promise. With all of that in mind, what should families be looking for? What are the non-negotiables students who have a neurodiverse profile be looking for in disability services?
Mm-hmm. It's hard to say because every student is so different, but I think you're getting to a good point that really students should be starting early and talking to the schools and asking these very specific questions. So really trying to connect with the SDS office. If you're doing a college tour or you're just happen to be visiting the college, finding out where the office is and asking them really specific questions. When they say you support students with disabilities, what does that mean? Do you have an early move-in program that helps support students with disabilities get started? Do you have formal programming that happens throughout the year? Do you have social groups? And what does that look like? How often do they meet? Who else is going? So things like that. So really asking. Another interesting question to get a sense of disability student advocacy, I guess, on campus is there a student disability services club or organization on campus? Like, is that something where students have an opportunity to gather with other students with disabilities? So really trying to find out per school. So every student's non-negotiable is going to be different. Right. Most recently, I worked at a very small school, and for some students, that was the non-negotiable. They could not see themselves at a really big institution. They were looking for something very small. Other students might be wanting different kinds of support that are only offered maybe at bigger institutions with more funding. Funding is a big thing. So families could also ask, how is the Student Disability Services Office funded? How are these extra programs funded? Are there grants? Is there institutional dedication to making sure there's programming specific maybe for neurodiverse students? So really families would have to ask questions, really specific questions to get that answer. I do want to go back for 1 second on the documentation, because one thing I notice is some students come and the student themselves maybe hasn't really read through their documentation recently. Maybe it was the parents were pretty involved in it and the student kind of knows what's going on. So another tip I have is before starting college, the student might want to read their psychoeducational evaluation. Just take a look at it in this new lens as a young adult who's going to college, because they might learn a little bit more through the testing or remind themselves more as a young adult about what the testing said and how their brain works. And then that can help them be able to talk about it a little bit more when they get to college.
I remember we did an interview with, again, Katie, and I think one of the things that she mentioned that I really like is that disability services like to have the accommodations like at the top of the form, not the very back. You know how neuropsychs, it's like they're always in the very back and you're going through everything, when for the officers, they really, would you confer with that it's kind of nice to see them up front?
Absolutely. That's so funny. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that specifically, but in the evaluations there, you go right to the back page to see what they are. Yeah. But yes, in student disability services, they're all laid out right there, usually on the front page. Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. And I think understanding what those are, and then I think one step what I understand also is that just because you get those accommodations doesn't mean you're always going to actually get them professor to professor, and that students need to email professors and work with their professors. Can you share some stories with us around that one?
Sure. And maybe I'll take it back to actually applying for accommodations, because something that's really important for students to know is that when they get to college, they have to self-disclose and request accommodations. So that's the term, self-disclose and request. And so that's going to be a big difference from high school. Like, people won't, if a faculty member sees a student's not doing well on a test, they're likely not going to ask, oh, what's going on? Do you have a learning disability? Like that, usually the conversation won't flow that way. The student would have to step up and say, not to their faculty member necessarily, but they could disclose to the Student Disability Services office, I have a disability, I need to request accommodations. So families do want to make sure their students are going through that process up front. Ideally over the summer, I really ask families, don't wait till like last thing on your checklist right before school starts. You can be having those conversations with the college. Once you commit to that college, you can start asking, when can I apply for accommodations? So the student will go through that process. They'll probably fill out an application. They'll provide documentation like we talked about a little bit already. They'll have an intake appointment, very likely with their college, where the student's going to talk to the Student Disability Services office about their accommodations. During that conversation, they'll confirm the accommodations. And then typically what happens, there's sort of two ways this will happen. One is that the Student Disability Services office will be the one to tell the faculty member what the accommodations are. So usually it's at my college, it's the faculty notification form. It's emailed to the faculty, copied to the student, and that's how the faculty gets notified that the student has accommodations. Some schools give the letter to the student and the student has to go hand it to their professors. So that could be another question, an important question for a student to find out, how does it work at the college they're going to? Now, one thing, once we approve the accommodations, like you're saying, students can choose to use them or choose not to use them. That's another maybe change. Like in college, as a student has a lot of advocacy over what the class is, what accommodations they think they need, what do they want to use. They might be approved for testing accommodations, but in this particular class, they really feel like they don't need the extra time. So they might choose not to, and that's fine. The disabilities, we support anything the student wants to do. But I will say that it's really important to apply for accommodations early and then actively choose not to use them versus not applying for accommodations, having some trouble, for example, not passing an exam, missing some deadlines, and then asking for accommodations. Because at the college level and at most schools, it's not retroactive. So we can't go back and help fix anything. It happened already. We could start at that point and move forward. So students can apply for accommodations at any point they're in college. They don't have to do it before they start freshman year, but we can't go back. So it's really important to be proactive and to make choices, intentional choices about how you want to use your accommodations, instead of getting into a situation where it's too late to go back and help that. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think we're kind of, we're wrapping it all around this. It's cyclical, right? All of this is connected. So I think it is, you answered my question. Although I'm going to piggyback on that and ask you, we keep saying accommodations. What are these accommodations? Let's talk about that.
Sure. I would say, so my experience, one of the most common accommodations is extended time on tests and reduced distraction testing. So at the institutions I've been at and work with, that seems to be the most common. And that really is because there's all sorts of students a college will be working with. Students have learning disabilities, there's neurodiverse students, there's students with medical conditions. All sorts of students are working and qualify for accommodations. So the extended time seems to help all sorts of students out. So that tends to be the most common. It is pretty defined. So it's pretty standard that students would either get time and a half or double time. Some schools might, provide more than that, but those seem to be the most common. And that could be a change for students, because I've had students I work with who say, oh, I could take as much time as I wanted in high school. I didn't really have a time limit. But at the college level, it's going to be pretty common that it's time and a half. So if the class gets an hour, you get an hour and a half. If the class gets 1 hour, you get 2 hours if you're double time. So that's very common. Other things, note-taking support, which has really evolved with
Yes.
AI and things like that. It used to be you'd hire another student to take notes for you, help take notes for the other student. Now there's a lot of different technology used for that. Housing accommodations could be something the Student Disability Services Office could help with. Single rooms need access to a kitchen, need a ground floor, things like that. Attendance. So some larger schools don't take attendance, but I've been at a small school that attendance is taken. But some students who have medical conditions and are gone for doctor's appointments, things like that. So the SDS office could help provide more attendance. Let me think about what else. I mean, really, a student can ask for whatever it is that they feel like they need. And the job of the Student Disability Services Office is to evaluate if that request is reasonable. So that's the criteria. Is it a reasonable request? And if it is determined to be reasonable, then we can put it into place. So we try to tell students like what the common accommodations are, but they really should ask for whatever it is they think they need, and then have a conversation with their Student Disability Services Office about if that's something that can be approved.
One of the things that I have found over the years, and some of my colleagues who are in this field feel like many parents are pretty blown away at how different and how few the accommodations that are actually approved are.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings us back to this other question is my student ready to go to college if they don't get the accommodations that we thought they were going to get? And have you had experience with that?
I have, and that's a good question. I mean, these are very young people at that age, 17, 18 years old, starting college, moving away from home. Many schools have live on campus requirements, so they're required to live on campus for the first time living by themselves. And so I feel like Student Disability Services offices are set up to help students. I really feel like students, maybe the question is your student ready in terms of being able to advocate for themselves? So maybe they don't feel quite ready for this big change, but are they a student who is willing to say, I need help. This is not working. I need help. Or I don't understand that. I find that students who have a really hard time with that are the students that really, quote unquote, aren't ready for college. Because once they get to college, all the college emails that are sent out are going to the student. The parents aren't copied on that. They don't know about them. Everything is being directed to your student. And so if the student doesn't understand or somehow gets into a situation where they need help, if they aren't able to speak up or don't know how to speak up, that's sort of where I see the issues come up. So really helping students practice that in high school, being the one to ask questions, being able to talk themselves about how it's going. And a student doesn't have to disclose their disability to anyone else on a college campus except the Student Disability Services Office. I have found more and more students are very comfortable talking to their faculty and saying, hey, I have anxiety. This was very difficult for me. Are you willing to help me? And students who can do that with faculty can make those connections. And then you really see faculty saying, in some cases, yes, here's what we can do. But students who aren't able to even speak up until like the, last week of the term, there's not a lot we can do. So it's tough. And accommodations, it's not going to be everything like in high school. So if that is a problem or the parent and family decides this is not going to work out because of that, then maybe taking a year or taking community college classes or taking a gap year to address what some of those things are, build some more skills. That could be a good option for students too.
Yeah, we've seen that. And there's some great programs where you can kind of practice lower stakes classes where maybe you just take 3 classes and not 5 classes and do some over the summer and kind of ease into some of those experiences, I think have really helped some of our students for sure. Let me think what else is on my mind. I feel like there is another conversation going on in the world of higher education, which has to do with everyone applying for accommodations. I mean, there was that article, I can't remember where it came from, if it was the Atlantic or Forbes, but about, at Harvard, how 90% of students, and so the people who don't apply for accommodations are at a disadvantage in some of these. I didn't ask you this ahead of time or discuss this. Do you have a pulse on those conversations?
I think that it's an unfortunate way to look at it. And I think those of us in the student disability services and higher ed community, you take offense to it, I suppose. I think everyone works really hard to make sure we're providing support for students who qualify. And most of my peers and colleagues across the country take their job very seriously. It's not a free for all. It's not intended to give some students an advantage over others. It is a fact and a good thing that the laws and the best practices expand to make sure we are including all sorts of students who have different disabilities. When I started in this area, it really was students who might be blind or deaf or in a wheelchair, and that was it. And so it's really, I think, wonderful to see how many students we are able to support through this process. I think that's why colleges have a process where you have to apply. That's why I think people are pretty tied to documentation. People meaning colleges, like, how can we support your request so that we can say, look, we evaluated this documentation and this supports their request for more time. And we have to believe a student when they are saying this is a barrier and here's what their experience is. And if we're able to support them, I don't know. I think that's a good thing. I think there is some students, I think it can get a little convoluted too with like emotional support animals versus service animals, like that. It gets complicated sometimes, but yeah, it's a complicated conversation, but I feel like the colleagues I know and I'm connected across the country, people work really hard in their student disability services offices to make sure we're abiding by the law and supporting students who really do qualify for these services. They still have to show what they know. Like I said, we're not, there isn't reducing the requirements or the fact that they need to know all these things that they learn in the class. Like none of that is reduced. So I don't know. I guess I'd leave it at that.
Well, I mean, I appreciate the answer. And I think for me, after, being in this field for over 30 years myself, is that having more access gives more opportunities to neurodiverse students who used to be locked out of experiences. And it's amazing to see for the students who especially self-advocate the successes that they're having with those kind of scaffolds and supports. And, I've said this for years, but so many of our academic institutions are really designed for one kind of brain. And that's not our students' fault. It's like, so how can we mold and create opportunities for students to have all kinds of experiences? So, I mean, obviously that's why we're talking, and that's why we're in the jobs that we're in, because advocacy for these incredible brains, creative and dedicated and often very passionate brains, like we need them in our world as citizens, having a higher education degree and plus, more. So it's great that, we're having this conversation. I love the work that you do. We only have a couple minutes left. Is there anything else that I have not mentioned that you feel like you want to say?
I think maybe, again, can't emphasize the importance enough about starting early in the process. So as families are going through their college search process, start having those conversations and apply for accommodations at your earliest opportunity, which is usually once you commit to a college and have the college email, your new college email address and ID number. And then maybe just quickly about parents, like it's great to support your student, but try as hard as you can to let your student lead the process. You could be there to support your student and ask your student if it's okay if you come to the meetings. Let them try to answer the questions on the first go. Let the student try to lead the process, and then the parent could be there to support. If more support is needed, there is usually a consent form that families can sign to be able to talk directly to staff at a college. But I'd really encourage parents from the start to really let your student lead this process, and you be the support system kind of a little bit in the background.
I think that's a great way to end our conversation. And I'll just piggyback on that I think that this college transition has become difficult for all students, neurodiverse or not. And I feel like mentorship, besides just parents, has been crucial for so many students. So whether it is an executive function coach or my colleagues in the college consulting field who are building these kinds of practices in to their curriculum. So every student, whether it's a college counselor at a school or a hired or executive functioning coach, has the knowledge to be able to guide kids to this place. Because just saying, oh, let your kid do it, I mean, that's fine for many kids, but for many kids, there needs to be a bridge. But the bridge shouldn't probably be the parents. And that's the gap that I think that we try to fill at Emerging. Well, I cannot thank you enough. I'm grateful for your knowledge. I love that you came on a work day to come join us and to glean your knowledge. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that we see you again soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Laura.
Okay, talk to you soon.